Okay, so, you know, we bought the land on the 5th of December of 1989. It was section 459 in Volusia County, and if we really want to look at the deed, we could go to that voucher and find it there. Okay, so there's a very simple example, and you know, these things look different. I printed one out from what I found online, you know, but you know, they all sort of, you know, these things all sort of look different, you know, but whether it's a construction company or a development company, ultimately, you're going to have very granular detail on how you're paying and building up all the way up to some sort of top level view that's going to let you understand what you've got in your development and process or construction and process accounts, depending on whether you're a developer or a construction company. Okay, so I don't want to scare you, but if you're a development manager or you aspire to work in a development realm, this is the kind of stuff you're going to be dealing with day in and day out. So shying away from doing case studies isn't going to help you. Okay, so I'll stop there. I think I'll stop there. Yep. And I'll move on to another subject unless we have any questions on that. Do we have any questions on that in particular? No questions. We're going to spend the next we're going to spend the next session and a half that we have left going over some diligence concepts. We used to have a diligence class in the program, and we got rid of it about 3 or 4 years ago, but I've always liked to carry on to the extent that I can some of the concepts and principles. Now, I've got a couple of legal classes, and my hope would be that in those legal classes, so you can look at diligence, you can take a look at a lot of different components, right? When you're buying something, especially in the context of real estate, you're going to look at things like title, you know, rights or obligations that you may have related, right? Restrictions that you may have, the protection of that, the insurance of that. So there's going to be a whole sort of legal realm in the context of diligence. I'd like to focus a little bit more on the financial and operational, because that's more where my personal expertise is and where I think we've got a gap in the program. You know, ultimately, diligence, there's a lot of different ways to define it or describe it, but you know, the way I would say it is diligence ultimately talks to mitigating risk. We've talked in class about, was it the old Donald Rumsfeld thing? There are known unknowns. There are things we don't know, but there are unknown unknowns. And so when we get into a situation where we want to acquire something, you know, once we pull the trigger, it's ours. And so if it's got any ticks or fleas, we're going to own them. And it's okay to buy a dog with ticks or fleas as long as we know we got to get them, you know, go to the vet, right? So, you know, I bought a boat last year. Nice. Yeah, it's nice. Yeah. No, but you go, you know, you go and you survey it, and you understand that there's a series of things that need to be done to it to get it to the condition that you want. And you try to estimate what that cost is, right? And so, you know, all the warranty on the, I called Yamaha, you know, the warranty's still good. You know, you do all this kind of stuff, right? Because you don't want any surprises. There's a lot of different ways to skin that cat. I've given you the book. The book talks you through a bunch of different concepts. I'm going to send, probably sometime during the week or at the end of next week, I'm going to send like 6 or 7 checklists that I have. And it's just material for your toolbox, for you to take with you and use as you may. I mean, some of the stuff will be, I reduced, when I did this whole 1031 and we bought a bunch of different buildings, I created my own checklist based on what was relevant to me at the time. But I'll send you like a checklist that a friend of mine that does acquisitions uses. You know, it's what's relevant to them. I'll send you one that like an engineering firm suggests. I'll send you one that an attorney put together, and every one of those views is going to have a different focus, right? Because at the end of the day, everybody's looking at that acquisition, you know, from a different place, okay? But there's some critical areas that you definitely want to take a look at. I had this friend of mine that I mentioned does acquisitions, and he's kind of been like a net seller, but now he wants to start buying stuff again. Did a presentation when I was doing this class, and I took some notes on it, and I thought it was an interesting way that he looked at it, and he kind of looked at diligence in 4 realms. He looked at what he called economic. He talked about what he called physical. He looked at what he called legal, and what he called market. And if you look at that, you know, ultimately, you know, the very first one, economic, really talks to cash flow. And he had 2 major components there. So he said, I'm going to take a look at leases, because that's really the source of cash flow. So I'm going to look at all the contractual obligations that I'm walking into, right? What are people, you know, that's the bond you're buying. So what are the lease rates? What's the expiration? What rights do they have to expand? What rights do they have to terminate? Okay, what deposits have they given me, or what deposits have, you know, kind of required? What obligations do I have to pay commissions to anybody, or to build out things, or to make concessions to people? Okay, so and ultimately the C, right? The C of credit, the conditions. So trying to understand the rights and obligations, right? And from that, there's a couple of different sort of techniques that one can build that help them analyze. That can help them analyze that cash flow. So I mean, a couple of them that you'll typically see. I'll show you a couple of these in a second, but one that you're definitely going to see is the lease or tenant roll. Okay, and that's a graphical view of lease expirations over time. Okay, so how many square feet mature in what year? So we've kind of talked about if the lease is the bond, right? How long does the bond go for, right? When does it expire? And then, as we've talked about in other classes, depending on, that's why it's important to understand the markets. We'll talk a little bit about that in a bit as well. Depending on where your leases are in comparison to the market, it may be an opportunity for you to get higher income, or it could be a risk to have lower income. Okay, so just a thought on that. Okay. Another thing that we do graphically, we do something called a stacking plan. And again, that's kind of a graphical look at, you know, who occupies what percentage of a building, you know, and you can also overlay some of the lease conditions on it. So a lot of times you'll take a look at, you know, one graphic that will give you a lot of information visually on how your income stream is going to come when you so leasing, looking at leasing gives you an opportunity to take a look at the income stream. The answer to the first question of the quiz earlier today is, what do we summarize lease conditions on? We abstract the leases. We use a lease abstract, and in that lease abstract, we take the contract and summarize that into a 1 or 2 page summary of rental rates, expansions, increases, etc. That lease abstract helps us during diligence to very quickly summarize a lease, but it also helps us plug that information into Argus. Or in the case that a seller has given us an Argus file, it gives us the opportunity to validate what the Argus file has versus what the lease has. So depending on the size of a deal, lease abstracting is something that we would do ourselves or something that we would outsource to a law firm or to a third party. Okay, so typically if you got a lot going on, you may outsource that to a law firm just to make sure that you've got somebody that understands it, especially if you've got a lot of different lease forms in a particular asset. You know, it's gone through multiple owners and you've got different forms. It might be so you want to take a look at the leases and you abstract the leases, or you create a lease abstract to summarize that information. So that's kind of the revenue side of the economic that you described. There's an operating expense side, right? So along those lines, you want to take a look at contracts that you have in place and opportunities that you may have to improve on that, or risks that may exist in items going up, right? So I mean, if expenses go down, you're probably not usually concerned. If expenses go up, you tend to be concerned for a variety of different reasons. So, you know, let me sort of back up from expenses, right? So, when you go to lease, what's important, and one of the things he talked about was very important, was to really understand lease structure, okay? And when we talked about that, we already talked about this in the class. Are we in a gross mode? Are we in a triple net mode? Or some variant in between of, you know, gross net of whatever, right? Or double net, you know? So are we at, you know, maybe we see in full service net of electrical, right? So it'll be gross but not including electrical, or net of janitorial. Because if we don't understand how expenses are shared, right, it's very difficult for understanding operating expense structure in an asset and understand what the impact of any changes of that would be. Case in point, I buy a building, it's poorly managed. I'm in a totally triple net lease environment. Every one of my tenants is triple net lease. I come in, I change the management company, I save a ton of money. Who benefits from those changes? It's a triple net lease environment. I save a bunch of operating expenses.
Them.
Who benefits from those changes?
The tenant.
The tenant. The tenant. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. But you've done all this work, and who's benefiting? The tenant. So we need to understand, right? We need to understand what the leasing structure is in order for us to properly evaluate that operating expense structure, right? Now, there's a couple of expenses that are critical, I'm going to tell you in Florida in particular, but potentially in other states as well, related to operating expenses. My proposition to you would be that I'm coming into a stabilized asset. You may be able to have some operating efficiencies, but the reality is just think about it. Utilities are regulated by the state, you know. The cleaning companies are a dime a dozen. They charge the same thing. It's a service issue. So you're not really going to impact most operating costs in the short run. But there's two items that could very quickly impact the operating expense structure of a building. And what are those?
HVAC?
You're like mechanical systems, like
Energy conservation?
Operating expenses. What happens when a building is sold? We just talked about it. It gets reassessed.
Yeah.
So the first thing is you may have a huge increase in property taxes. So, question number one, whose impact is that? Is it the tenant or is it mine?
Depends on if you...
Well, I mean, eventually, hopefully, right, it's the tenants, right? At some point, but you need to understand that, right? And you may not have all triple net leases. You may be in a gross market. Or you may have negotiated or inherited some gross leases and some net leases. So, it's just a matter of understanding what you're walking into. So, property taxes are definitely going to change. There's one other potential area which could increase or decrease depending on who the seller is and who the buyer is.
Sometimes there are regulations out there that have been imposed that whenever it's resold, that they come into play then, like
Well, what typically happens is most property appraisers, so most property appraisers tend to have a baseline number. So I don't do this for a living. If we've got any people that do these like ad valorem tax appeals and stuff, I'll let you jump in, but typically a tax assessor will start with a number. And he or she will increase that a certain percentage every year. But the one time that they've got an opportunity to change that base is when there's a transaction. Because they can point to a market value at that point. And so what happens is, typically when there's a transaction, you have a much larger than percentage increase in the assessed value of an asset. Does that make sense? No?
Well, it wasn't what I thought I was saying, but
Okay, what were you saying?
forget what I was saying, because it wasn't, I don't think it was worth saying.
Okay, well, I thought that's what you were
What I
saying.
thought I read is that I thought that whenever a property changes hands or that there's a, you know, like you said, it's reassessed for taxes and everything, but it also could be reassessed for subsequent environmental regulations that.
Well, we'll talk about all those. There's a whole bunch of other impacts that happen at that point too. So I mean, and environmental is an issue. So, but we'll get to that. But let's so property tax is one. There's one other one, especially in Florida, that's critical for us: insurance. And so ultimately, insurance is going to depend on.
Why am I here?
Well, it's going to depend on where the markets are, but it's going to depend on your ability to procure better rates than the owner or not, than a previous owner or not. Okay, and that, you know, if you're a big national company, you've got a big national portfolio, you're going to have much better rates than if you're a local owner that owns 3 buildings in Florida, and you're being rated strictly on a portfolio in a high-risk area. Now, some people can mitigate that. You can hire a national firm. That's one of the things that the CBREs on the property management front bring to the table, is they'll say, hey, you can sign on to our national policy, right? So, you know, sometimes you can mitigate that away. But the problem comes back to, right, who's responsible for that? And what I don't want to minimize is the importance of, so, at the end of the day, you want to be competitive, okay? At the end of the day, you want to have a competitive asset. We walked in, when we bought the trade zone, the trade zone had a significant operating expense component. You know, I had to provide security, we had a whole IT department, we had a whole customer service department, because ultimately all the merchandise that came in and out of the zone, we were responsible for, and we transited through customs. Now we had to secure it, we had to insure it, blah, blah, blah. And we had to provide an office for customs there. And what happened is the typical industrial property was like, at the time, $2. Operating expenses, we were incurring almost $5. What the previous owner had done is said, well, we're going to subsidize that. We know it's $5, but the market doesn't let us charge $5. So they were trying to compete, you know, sort of, I forget the exact numbers, but market rents were sort of in the $7 industrial gross realm at the time. And these people, so that would have been 5 net and 2 operating expenses, right? These people at almost 5 really would have needed to have charged $10 a square foot to be right back, you know, where everybody else was, right? $5 of rent plus $5 of operating expenses. Well, they were doing all their leases here. So we bought this place, and I couldn't get rid of this expense structure. But the owner said to me, well, we're not eating that. So we started doing deals at $10.40 a square foot. Well, how much demand do you think we had at that when the market was at 7? Not a lot. And what happened to the base sale when people renewed leases? They started walking out the door. So ultimately, it does behoove you to have a competitive property, regardless of what the lease structure is. ultimately, if you could find a lower cost operating environment for your tenant without impacting your return, everybody wins. Okay, everybody wins. So, but you got to understand, it's not an issue of it's good or bad. It's an issue of understanding, and diligence ultimately talks to understanding what you're walking into and making an informed decision. Okay, it's good, I'm going for it. It's bad, I'm staying away. It's bad, but I can fix it, right? Like the bionic woman or the bionic man or whatever, we can fix him. Okay, it's only $6 million or whatever it was. When we talk about physical, so that's kind of the economic realm that he broke up, right? So that's his economic realm. When we talk about physical, right? When we talk about physical, he kind of broke it up in his mind. There were three different things, and in my mind there's two. There's a third one he adds on, and I'm going to get to why in a second. But he talked about basically structural, and he spoke about it environmental. We've kind of talked a little bit about that. So let's kind of go back. You started talking about HVAC, and so when we talk about structural, I'm kind of going to break it up into, well, we could do it in tax talk, right? We could say 1231 property. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, but it makes sense, right? It could be, it could really be, you could kind of say, okay, the building and the stuff inside the building. That's a, I'm not, you don't have to, this is just accounting humor. It's bad humor, okay? I'm sorry.
No, that was bad.
I'm trying to connect the dots here, okay? Forget the connection to tax. It has nothing to do with that. But you really can take a look at what's the envelope and what's inside the envelope, okay? So you can look at structure the way my friend looked at it. You can look at structure, and you can look at environmental. So you can kind of look at what's here underground and what's here overground. And when you look at what's overground, you can take a look at what the envelope is, and you can look at what's inside the envelope. So when I look at what's the envelope, right? So the physical structure, right? The structural integrity of an asset. But we could look at glazing. We could look at roofing, right? We could say landscaping, you know. We could talk about parking, right? So we could look at the physical integrity of the structure, but then we could look at all the systems that are inside to make this thing go. It's all the mechanical and plumbing, right? So your HVAC systems, your elevators, your escalators, your bathrooms, your boilers, right? And then the actual physical tenant spaces, right? So, you know, paint and carpet, you know, common areas, the bathrooms in the common areas, the hallways, okay? So, because, you know, ultimately, again, you want to understand what you're walking into, right? And to the concept we talked about before, what's the deferred maintenance? Ultimately, most of this work is done. Thankfully now there's a few national firms that you can kind of hire everywhere and will do these things for you, and they'll kind of do both. But the ultimate result of a structural review is somebody's going to go in and assess all these systems, but they're going to give you a cost figure of what it's going to take to make those things functional. Okay? Where it gets a little bit dicier is, well, when you look at aesthetics and you say, you know, I want to redo this lobby. That's probably not a structural issue. It's more of a marketing issue, but there may be dollars associated with that. Okay?
This is all, is this before or after the costs go hard in the purchasing of this thing? Was it?
So
the escrow period.
No, so legal is his next idea, and he starts with the PSA, with the purchase sale agreement. The timeline I've always worked with, which I'm not going to say it's the only way to do this, but the timeline, so let's take a look at institutional asset sales in this country. There's going to be some period of time in which an owner is going to prep a building for sale. Okay, by the way, let me back up a second. I'm giving you the more complex scenario of a building. If you're just buying land, not all of this stuff applies. So you're buying land, I haven't gotten to legal yet, there's going to be a whole bunch of stuff related to rights and obligations that are associated with it and environmental, but you don't have any of these envelope, and inside the envelope are rent roll issues. So I'm giving you the whole ball of wax. Depending on what you're buying, it may not be so complex. What may even be more complex than buying the whole envelope is buying a failed project, or half the structure's up, or buying a development where half the infrastructure's done, but you don't know what you can salvage and what you got to start from scratch. Okay, so that's even more complicated than just land or land and building. It's something that's halfway. Now, so typically an intelligent seller would prep his building. An intelligent seller would go on ahead and hire these consultants to do these property reports, address the things that are not so costly. It's no different than what you would do with your house, right? Paint it, right? Hide the water damage that you got, steam clean the carpet, put lipstick on the pig or whatever, right? So it's still a pig, but it's got lipstick, so it looks prettier. All right? But you would also at that point, frankly, you may identify things that may make your asset unsellable. And you might say, you know what? This guy says, I gotta put a new roof in and it's $3 million. And anybody who's gonna come in and buy that building is gonna require you to do that. And it might not be worthwhile to sell if you gotta pull $3 million out of the deal. Because you're either gonna do it or you're gonna have to give the guy credit to do it. So hopefully there's some sort of prep work that's happening here, okay? Now, you're going to hire a broker, you're going to hire E-Still, you're going to hire HFF, Cushman, CBRE. There's another one that does lower tier that's very prominent down here called Marcus and Millichap. You've probably heard of them. And one guy runs, this is on our board. So anyway, so you're going to, and they're going to start putting a book together. So they're going to start putting a book together, all these pretty pictures and all these metrics and all these market things that Tomas has shown you guys how to do and why you should buy that building. And they're going to be telling you what they think it's worth. They're going to put together an Argus file, and then they're going to put together a pretty book, brochure, and they're going to send it to hundreds of people out there. So typically what's going to happen is, and the timelines are going to change depending on how hot the market is. I would tell you today, from here to offers, you probably have no more than 20 to 30 days. And during that time, you typically are allowed to tour the property, but that's about it. Now, you're likely going to have access to a data room. And that data room is likely today going to be virtual. Okay, so in there you're going to have the leases, you're going to have property reports, you're going to have all the contracts that you've got on the site, okay? Anything related to the physical condition or the income stream associated with that building. Historical tax returns. I don't want to pick on Armando why he's here, while he's not here, but what I think he said it in class, he didn't ask, afterwards I asked him if he collects rents as part of his job for his dad.
Got
He
it.
collects rents. So I said, well, do you use like any apps? Or he goes, no, we're cash. Okay, so if his dad wants to sell the buildings, right? I thought he was here. If his dad wants to sell the buildings, right? So if your dad wants to sell the buildings, how do you substantiate the cash flow from those buildings?
They just got in here.
No, but that's a scenario. If you're a cash business, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot, if you're a cash business, how does a buyer substantiate that? So one of the things you might find in a data room, especially with smaller properties or more owner-operated real estate, is you might find tax returns. And the rationale is going to be, if the guy's declared the tax, he's definitely collected the cash. Now, the question is going to be, how much over what he declared did he really collect? And then how do you bridge that gap? But that becomes a problem, right? So, but that's why you've got to have, in fact, diligence, a lot of times focuses a lot more on being an intelligent seller than being an intelligent buyer. And doing the right preparation, okay? So in that data room, you're gonna have that, historical financials, tax returns, all kinds of stuff. If there are specific, permits, or zoning, or easements, you're gonna have all that in here, okay? Deeds, existing title, blah, 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 blah. You're gonna have all this stuff in there. So you're gonna have 20 to 30 days to schedule a tour and get your consultants going on this. Now you're spending money, you haven't even made an offer yet. So like in about 20 days, somebody's gonna send you an email and say, okay, offers are due on so-and-so date. So, again, this is my experience. I checked with a couple of guys recently, and things are not radically different in the market today. You might send 100 books out. Out of that, you might have 30 people that actually show some sort of interest, including people that tour the building. You're probably going to get about 15 offers. Okay? Now, what happens after this?
Due diligence.
Qualified.
You've been doing diligence.
They
Been
listed
doing
it.
Well,
diligence.
you're the
Oh.
seller, right?
You had 30
You're
days.
the buyer.
Well,
You've
you're the
been
buyer.
doing.
So you're one of those 15.
Well, say I'm one of the 15. I could be one of the 30. I could be one of the 100. I got a book. I went and toured. I didn't make an offer. But maybe I did make an offer. Okay? Maybe I spent some money. I looked at the book, I toured, and I decided not to spend any money on it. Maybe I toured, spent some money on it, but decided not to bid. Okay? Or maybe I went through all that, I decided to put a price in. Now the broker's telling you, hey, this is going to sell for 22, so just keep that in mind. Okay, well, I don't get there. Maybe you should bid. I mean, hopefully you've got enough of a rapport there that, now, my personal experience, I'm going to give you, out of those 15, you're probably going to have about 10 that are within a couple $100,000 of each other on a $20 million deal. Now, it goes back to the point I talked about an informed client base, okay? You're probably going to have some guy that's like so high that he missed it, and you have 2 or 3 people that are bottom fishers, that are totally out of it. Now, what happens here is the broker sits with the owner and says, okay, we're gonna find the 5 most likely buyers, and we're gonna ask for best and final offers. So you thought you gave your best shot, but now you really want to stay in the game. Now you got to reach a little bit more. So they're going to give you 10 days to come up with a best and final. Okay? And so then they're going to say, they're going to sit with the owner and they're going to pick 1 or 2 guys, maybe 3, and then they're going to do diligence on the buyer. So then they're going to call you up and say, okay, what's your source of funds? How are you going to close this thing? Oh, you're a 1031 guy?
Got him.
I'm not sure. Or you're an all-cash guy? Show me the cash, okay? So, believe it or not, you will not always get the highest price prevailing here, okay? So the broker may steer people in a particular way, but really, the seller's looking for certainty. Now, one of the things that you're also going to find here, you're likely going to have the form of the proposed purchase-sale agreement included in the data room. And part of your offer is going to include your comments on the PSA. Because they may say, you know what, they're looking for representations we're not going to make. Because going back to the point that I made earlier, if you know that you need a new roof, you got to represent that. I mean, somebody's going to look to you to look for that representation, okay? That you don't know something that you haven't disclosed. Okay, so there's going to be a form. So part of this decision here also is going to be, how far are you gonna stray from the PSA? Okay, so let's say we award this, so now we're on day 40. You've awarded this, now you gotta put a deposit. That was your question, right? You wanted a deposit. Say you put a deposit. Now your earnest money is gonna be how much on a $20 million purchase, roughly? What might it be?
2 million.
250,000.
300, 200, 300.
Not a lot. Not a lot. I mean, it could be 25, it could be 50. I mean, hopefully at that point, you know it's a serious guy. It's a serious guy. I mean, you've interviewed him. You've vetted him, you know his source of funds, you know he wants to buy the building. He's already gone through 2 offers. You don't ask for a lot at that point. Now you're going to go through a couple of different things there now. You're going to have probably a 5, max 10-day period where you're going to finalize a PSA and sign it. Okay? All right? Typically at that point, that's when that earnest money is going to come in. Okay? And then you're typically going to give a period, I'm going to say max, that's going to be 30 to 45 days. And somewhere in there, you're going to have a hard date to put up or put out, okay? And at that point, you're probably going to ask for maybe $500,000 at that point, okay? So you're going to say, you know what, you got 15 days, you've already looked at these reports, you're going to have these guys endorse it, you're going to have them update it, you're going to like really tour, you're going to line up your financing, you're going to make sure you've got your debt in place, okay? You're going to cross your T's and dot your I's. And you're going to say, okay, now I got to come up with $500,000, and then they're going to give you, you know, another 30 days or max to close. So, you know, you're looking at 60 to 90 days max, and you're probably not going to have a very long period of time where you're going to be able to walk out without getting your money reimbursed.
And the money you're talking about reimburses the 25.
Yeah, because once you put your hard money, you're in. Now you're committed to close. Now, can you have specific performance? Can you have a specific performance clause in a contract? I mean, I think you can, but I don't think that's very common in real estate. It's like, how can you force somebody to close? Especially if they can't. They can't get the financing. How can they close? Yes.
So the term under contract would start right after this first 25 grand? Is that under contract?
You're negotiating this PSA. You're negotiating this PSA. When you sign it, you put your earnest money. Then you've got a certain number of days, okay, to go hard, to finalize all your diligence. And then you're going to have a certain number of days to close after that. Now, this is all negotiable. Okay, this is all negotiable.
When people say
I mean, I've seen stuff where you got a 15-day period to make an offer, and people are looking to close in 15 days. I mean, it's all how valuable the property is and how hot the market is. Has anybody seen anything radically different in this, or? We talked the other day about environmental briefly, and I know one of the things that I said, I think you were asking about funeral homes or something. And so typically in most, and I think to your point on what happens, it's kind of a tricky thing here because most people do what's called a phase 1 environmental, and a phase 1 does what? What goes into a phase 1?
Let you know if there's anything that you need to do in phase 2 on.
if it's necessary to do a phase 2.
That's what the book said. It tells you if you got to go to do anything on a phase 2.
Yeah.
So typically a phase 1 is going to look at it's going to do one of a couple of things, right? In addition to like a visual observation, it's going to have a review of public records related to any specific action related to your site or any neighboring sites in which you may have some leaching or leakage of information. But that's typically limited to visual observations or documented things. So for example, Yes, it's very simple. You can say, you go down and you find out that there are underground, old fuel tank. You're buying a corner lot for CVS and there used to be a gas station there. There are underground fuel tanks there, or there used to be underground fuel tanks there. Okay, we recommend that you do a phase 2. Okay, right. Now, my only recommendation here in all of this stuff is there's a couple things I want to talk about here. So one is, that's all fine and dandy, but if there's been some industrial or, potential heavy uses there, you really owe yourself a favor, and you really need to go and do some soil and some groundwater sampling, which you may not like the results of, okay? But the fact that a site's contaminated and requires remediation doesn't mean that it's untenable or unpurchasable. It just means there's costs associated with that, which may not be that dramatic. I propose to you that I know for a fact, just logic. Where are the Walgreenses and CVS's? On corners. What used to be on corners in this country? Gas stations. What do you think is sitting underneath most CVS's and Walgreens?
Gas tanks.
Either tanks that are there, or tanks that were removed that have some sort of contamination associated with it. Has that been fully remediated? In most cases, no. In some cases, you get away with the fact that there's a tank there, but there's no known source of contamination. Or, you know what? You put some pumps back there, and there's a cost to remediating the groundwater there. And, every month some guy comes out, changes a filter, and every couple of years you got to do another well until you eventually get rid of the remediation. Or you say, you know what? Yeah, it's on the edge of the property. We're going to come in and remove so many cubic yards of soil, and we've got to send it to someplace in Alabama to get it burned or whatever, and it's going to cost me $75,000 or more, or a lot more. And then that's what's it. But so now, I think to your point, and it's really an extension of what you brought up, is what happens, especially if you go into a phase 2, either you do it or it's recommended and then you do it. And you find out there's something wrong, like, do you have to tell somebody? It depends. I know it's contaminated. Do I have an obligation to tell the municipal authorities?
If you're a government worker, probably.
Yeah. I mean, my understanding is that you don't have a legal obligation to self-report yourself.
Well, that's in the
Well,
Constitution.
no, I don't believe that you've got an obligation to self-report yourself. And I know the consultants don't have an obligation to report to the authorities. Okay, I mean, that report has nexus to you, not to somebody else. But what you can't do is be the, what's that animal that sticks its head in the ground?
Ostrich.
Ostrich. You can't be the ostrich and say, I know there's a problem. The authorities don't know it, so I'm going to avoid, dealing with it because the guy behind that's going to come in. So, who are the printing companies, gas stations, dry cleaners,
Yeah.
right? I mean, chemical companies, any of those, there's going to be issues. Or if you're somewhere near where some of those things work, right? So, it's a whole sort of realm, and there's where you got to get good attorneys where there's issues, because there are so typically there's no sort of nexus to be on the seller, right? But with environmental issues, they sort of attach to the chain of title. Okay, and so if you own something and sold it, and sold it, and sold it, and there's contamination on it, it may ultimately come back to you, even though you're removed from it at this point, okay? Yes, Jeffrey?
Would the same go for like historical artifacts, like if you encountered some Indian princess and you moved her to another location, you
I
hired...
think the problem there are environmental conditions that I think you get into where you do have an obligation to report. So I think if if you do come across artifacts, I think you've got an obligation to report. You can't just ignore it. I mean, like the one we talked about and we know everybody knows is the Indian burial mound on the mouth of the Miami River. And ultimately, the county had to buy it, you know? But where across from that, where there's a Whole Foods, there's like four towers there called the Met. That's what MDM built. So I know there's a Whole Foods. There's the Marriott with the hotel, with the office tower. There's a residential they're doing with some theaters. Are you doing that? There's the one that's got like the silver, whatever. I don't know anything about theater. They're putting that thing, that. And then, well, that's it. It's those three. Anyway, when they were excavating one of those, what did they come up with? Well, that's where the original, no, it wasn't Indian. It was the original, Henry Flagler. We've talked about him, right? So Flagler's wife got sick. Somebody told him that there was good weather in Florida. He brought her down here. She got better. He said, wow, this thing's great. I want to build a hotel here. How do I get people here? Let me build a railroad that gets people here. And it took him 15 years to assemble the land to build a railroad. And then he built a series of hotels. There's one left in St. Augustine. I don't remember what it's called. And then the Breakers is another one. The one in Miami was called the Royal Palm. And it was a beautiful building that was on that site. And when they started digging out, they started coming out with plates and all this stuff. And construction was halted for months while they excavated the site to see if there were any historical elements there.
How long ago was that?
3-4 years ago?
I'm talking about Flagler. I mean, it wasn't like it was 1,000 years ago.
No, Flagler was 1890s.
Okay.
No, but but in Florida, 100 years is historical, man. Come on. I mean, you know. So, and then there's other stuff. I think I mentioned in class one day we had we're 95 and a turnpike meet up in Fort Pierce. I mean, they kind of intersect a couple of times. And the very last one where I think Walmart's the one who's got a big distribution facility there. We had like 80, 90 acres. It was great industrial distribution land, you know. And we couldn't build on it because there had been a sighting of a bald eagle.
Yeah.
And I know, it's crazy as that sounds, that one, you've got like 5 years from the last sighting of a protected species before you can develop. And so like, if it disappears for 4 years and somebody sees it, then you got another 5 years you got to wait. So, yeah, so there's all kinds of, there's all kinds of other stuff out there. The third thing that my friend had on this physical area was replacement cost. Everybody's got their own bugs. This guy's got a big bug for replacement cost. A lot of acquisition guys have a bug for replacement cost. And I've said this before. So there's a reason why you want to take a look. Why do you want to take a look at replacement cost?
Assess the value.
That's the,
I think it's a reality check.
yeah.
So at the end of the day, it's no different than that settlement statement. It's a reality check. How much am I paying for this versus what it would cost to build? So, listen, hopefully there's some correlation. I keep saying for years, because of the land values in Florida, what have we found? That replacement costs on most acquired assets tends to be higher than the purchase price. I mean, that's been the case for almost 20 years now in Florida. Makes no sense. I mean, it makes sense for me to buy, right? Because it would cost me more for me to build it, and there's no cash flow associated with it. So, he talked about legal, and he talked. We can go into these a little bit more details. There's something I wanted to catch on the last one that I want to spend a little bit more time on. Talked about the purchase-sale agreement, so negotiating the purchase-sale agreement. Now, what's important in the purchase-sale agreement is, they say, well, it's pretty simple. You know, seller conveys title, buyer accepts title in, in exchange for this amount of money. But most PSAs tend to be really thick, and they ultimately get into, going back to risk, is if you're a buyer, you want maximum representations from the seller about what they know about the asset and about the tenants. If you're the seller, and you stop to think that most institutional grade assets in this country are owned by institutions where individuals don't want to take responsibility, sellers never want to make any representations. And so you really start getting, back and forth on what level representations or what representations you can make and you can't make. I think as a rule of thumb, typically there are certain carve-outs, or what are called bad boy provisions, that sellers are never really going to be able to get away from. But in institutional transactions in this country, for the most part, sellers will not represent much to you, irrespective of the fact that you want them to make representations on, environmental, whatever. You might get negative assurance from sometimes. We're not aware of any, notices from. We have not received any notices from any legal entities regarding breaches in zoning or, or local, use laws. We've not received any notification from environmental agencies. You might get that negative, but you're not going to get affirmative. There's no environmental contamination. There are no structural defects with the building. There are no defaults on leases. You might get the negative. We're not aware of any defaults. Okay, so you're not going to get a lot of positive affirmation. You might get some negative. Okay, but PSAs can get hung up over time. You can get into back and forth on putting money in escrow to support some of those representations that are made. Okay, you can get into contests on or discussions on the transferring of intellectual property, signage or names or trade names. I mean, it could be when you get attorneys in a room. I tell a story. Downtown Doral was something that started in 2001. And I started working at Cadena at that time. It was an old project that was managed by J.P. Morgan. It was a separate account that owned it. I never knew for sure. I always believed it was a GM pension fund, but I don't know that to be a fact. I know it was a separate account. J.P. Morgan managed it. They owned it for 30 years. And then the buildings were tired, and they really needed a refurbishment. And Armando had this great idea to, create a Norman core there, blah, 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 blah. So we started working with J.P. Morgan, and we worked with J.P. Morgan for 4 years before we signed a joint venture agreement. So it was in 2005 where we actually signed a joint venture agreement. So why am I talking about this? This went back and forth. I get an invoice one day for $1 million from J.P. Morgan's attorney. And I couldn't stand this guy. I still can't stand this guy. He's really a very competent attorney. I can't stand it. He's just, because he's a guy that at $800 an hour will argue that your cap is gray, but you know what, if I really look at it, well, maybe it's not really gray. Maybe it's blue with a gray background. But I don't know. Maybe that's just a different way to look at it. I mean, what do you think? So, but this guy, he spent $1 million, and then what pissed me off is that then our partner sends it to me saying, let the venture pay for it. Well, no, that's your cost. No, let the venture pay for it. We had spent like a couple $100,000, but so attorneys have no, sorry, with all due respect, I'm looking at you, and you can never call one. Imagine, especially if you got to call an attorney in New York on a specialty item, there will always be 5 or 6 guys in the call. Okay? It's not just one. And you just hear the thing going ka-ching, 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 ka-ching. So what you don't want, and you got to be very careful is, we all have our strengths, is you don't want attorneys negotiating by themselves, in the abstract. and you need to understand what they're arguing about, and you need to understand when you gotta tell them to say, yes, you're right, but we're spending more than what the risk is associated with what we're spending. Okay? So don't get me wrong, the most important thing in doing diligence is having a good legal team, okay? Especially so, there's the contractual part of that, but then there's a whole sort of other issue related to title, survey, zoning, easements, right? So what are the rights and obligations that are associated with that? What restrictions do I have? Okay, what can I do with it? So very, very important. I'm not going to do it today because I want to cover something else. But next week, what I'll cover, one of our board members, Jesse Holzhauser, who used to teach in the program, came and he made a presentation when I taught the diligence class as well. And Jesse's got a lot of experience, and he has like 15 or 20 due diligence problems that they've run into over the years. So he's kind of accumulate them. It's kind of like, boy, did this cost us? We'll never make this mistake again. And a lot of the ones he has ultimately come back with understanding what you could do or what you can't do on a particular site. And he talks about ministerial versus political rights, or what can I get if I if I tick the boxes, and what can I get if I gotta kiss somebody's behind, or pay them off, or be pretty, or pack a room with people or whatever. What does it take to do that? So I don't want to minimize the importance of that, but that's not my area. It's like get a good attorney, get a good legal team, and let them do that, or have good people in your staff that do that kind of work, and then hold them accountable. What I want to jump to is a segment on the last one, which is what he calls market. And in market, there are two sort of bits to the market. There is a sales comp perspective. So we talked about replacement cost as a reality check on purchase price. Well, definitely looking at comparable transactions and understanding what prices per square foot and cap rates are should also form of that. When we look at how are appraisals, how are appraisals formulated? What are the three different approaches that are used to appraise?
Discounting.
So we can discount cash flows, right?
Replacement costs.
We can look at replacement costs.
And your comps.
And we can look at sales comps, right? And then the appraiser pulls those things together. When we're doing diligence for us to validate the values that we're paying, we can hire an appraiser to do this stuff for us, or we can ourselves take a look at what are market comparables and what replacement cost would be, okay? But, again, I'm looking at the whole ball of wax when we're taking a look at this, taking a look at the market and understanding where the potential income stream is really what becomes critical for us. So I'm actually gonna change. We're gonna do some group projects next week, hopefully in class, unless I decide over the week that I'd rather do other stuff. But the way I have it envisioned right now is we're gonna do some group work, and I'll send some stuff out during the week and let you work on it. And what I want to do is spend a little bit of time is taking a look at markets. And And I'm going to send you some information, and then you're going to look at markets, and you're going to come back and report. Because at the end of the day, if we don't understand what the market we're buying in, then we're kind of... So I'm going to show you two different things. Or I'm going to talk about one thing, and I'm going to show you one thing, and then you guys can get out of here. So, there's a lot of sources for market information. CoStar is probably the one that's most widely used, and better known, and probably the one that has the most reach. But a lot of the large brokerage firms provide free information, and I'm all into free information. We had CoStar access once in the program, and frankly, I think the students blew it. CoStar is very expensive. One of the instructors, who's actually, I think, coming back to teach, who's very good, got us like $10,000 worth of credits. And this is all report-based, it's subscription service, so depending, you can buy different levels. And they said, look, as a university, you got $10,000 worth of and 3 bozos spent it in a week. And I'm not sure whether they were doing work personally or they were doing work for a program, but it disappeared, so we never got it again. So you don't get access to CoStar anymore, but if do any of you have it at work? Yeah, those of you who have it at work, I mean, it's a great resource. Is it perfect? No. Is it 100% accurate? No. Is it indicative? Yes. Okay? And it's a lot easier than, as I mentioned the other day, going out and, you know, dialing for dollars on your own and trying to find out all that information. Okay? But since I don't have CoStar right now, I'm going to try to get some from a student at another university to tap into their dollars during the week. I rely on JLL, CBRE, Cushman, Marcus Millichap. They all have stuff. Some are stronger than others. I printed this week the national office statistics for JLL. Now they do this quarterly. They do this for every market. The lady that runs the Fort Lauderdale office is one of our alumni, and she does a really good job. And so I'm just going to show you some stuff. I printed this report, and I started marking some stuff on it, and I thought, okay, you can learn a lot just by looking at a sheet of paper. Okay, so the first thing is, how large is the office market in this country? So we need to know how big the market is. How big's the office market in this country? 30% of what? How big are all the asset classes? Tell me something that I know.
Like commercial, like retail, restaurant, office, let's say.
Okay, so what's the total of everything so that I can put 30% of that?
Let's say retail.
Is it bigger than a bread box?
I don't know, you have some crazy little.
Numbers.
No,
No, but if you tell me it's 30%, if it's 30%, it's great. But 30%
You want me
of
to guess
what?
a number? I don't
I want a number. How big is it? Is it 100 million? Is it a billion?
Dollars?
No, it's more than a
Square
billion.
feet.
Trillion.
Yeah, I knew he was gonna get square feet.
Square feet. How many square feet? How big is it? How many
In the United
office?
States, I'll
How
take a
many
guess.
office square feetses are there in
800 million. More? More.
billions and billions?
Billions and billions.
Billions and billions and billions.
We got, you got a number. It's over a billion.
Okay, looking at the major markets in this country, the way Jones Lang LaSalle describes it, there's over 4 billion square feet of office.
Very nice.
Okay? Now, and that's taking a look at the 50 largest markets in the country. Now, curiously, there are 5 markets that are 40% of that. Which are the 5 largest office markets in the country?
New York.
LA.
Okay, so New York, and New Jersey. New York and New Jersey is number 1. What's number 2?
California.
Chicago.
California's a state.
Chicago?
You guys are all wrong. No, dude,
LA.
no!
Miami.
Us? Miami? Really?
Gotta be more than like the
Guys,
best part of
You're missing it.
what did we talk about last week? Who sucks all our money out of our pocket?
DC.
Washington, D.C. is
Oh.
by a long shot,
Who said that?
okay?
Is that you?
By a long shot. Not value, square footage, okay?
Oh, that's good.
Washington, D.C.
They might have it by
Now you guys,
That includes government offices too?
yeah. And there's a
Those
lot
aren't
of
really on the
those.
market though.
Sorry?
That's not any part of any kind of commercial,
This is all office.
just office on.
Just office.
Okay.
Just office. Now, the other ones you mentioned, so L.A.,
Chicago.
Chicago,
Houston.
Dallas. So
Dallas. That really-
Dallas. Right after Dallas, you have
Austin.
Houston and Atlanta,
18.
okay? And Philadelphia and Boston.
Okay.
So I didn't add them, but if you add those other 4 markets or 5 markets, you're like at 65, 70%. So to your question, Miami or Fort Lauderdale? Absolutely not. Do you know how large the office market is in Fort Lauderdale? We should know that.
Yeah,
We don't know how big
I
it
got
is
it.
nationally.
I saw 1.8 million.
1.8 what?
Million square feet.
In Fort Lauderdale, you got more square footage than that on Nova's campus.
Okay, then double that. I mean square. I mean like 2 times it by itself.
For just the downtown or the entire
No,
city?
so this is both CBD. It's funny, they used to do this report and they gave you both CBD and suburban, but they only do this as one now.
The ciphers are crazy.
So they've got like 22 million square feet. And Miami, they talk about like 36 million square feet. So our markets, our office markets are insignificant compared to, now, where do we have more square footage than other places? Like, we definitely have a lot of multifamily, because we have a lot of people that live here, right? We've got a lot of retail. In Miami in particular, there's a lot of industrial, but none of the metros here. Tampa, well, Tampa's actually not a small market. It's 37 million. Orlando is 28 million.
I heard Orlando's like the fourth fastest growing economy in the US right now.
It could be, and the actual largest suburban office submarket in the state is West Shore in Tampa. So, yeah, there's a very small CBD, but there's a very large suburban, because there's a lot of people going there. Housing's more affordable, that whole area is also. So now, other curious, so these people do like a clock. It's kind of curious. These people do a clock and they're like rising, peaking, falling, in the bottom. According to their perspective, nobody's in the bottom. There's some people just rising, and there's some people, their big three markets, they're saying are falling, curiously. Now, occupancy, we talked about, I know I've mentioned this in class. What would occupancy or vacancy, whichever, what would office occupancy be in this country? And it's going to, CBD is going to be higher than suburban, there's no doubt, okay?
Like 85?
70%.
So it's nationally, it's 85%, so vacancy is 15%. Now what happens is, CBD is typically north of 90, and suburban could be 20. Okay? Now, it's kind of interesting. You take a look at some markets and you say, San Francisco, vacancy is only 6%.
Yeah,
And rents are $81 a square foot.
yeah.
Now, nationally, rents are $34 a square foot. Now, these are asking rents, but $81. We have a new board member that came on, and she's an attorney. She was at a big firm, and she starts Monday at one of these autonomous drive vehicle companies, the one that GM's invested in, Cruise. And so she's telling me her husband's a GC. And so how much product was delivered in San Francisco last year? 0, the goose egg. There's only 4 million square feet under construction. We talked the other day about the restrictions that exist on this. But she says that 4 million square feet is out like 5 years. So there's nothing coming online. So it's a good time to be a bull if you own real estate in San Francisco. Now, I don't know if buying is the right thing because there's going to be a high ask. Now, so that's a market that's doing well. New York City's $81. Now, curiously, New Jersey. So the sort of suburban side of the New York market, negative 2.2 million square feet of absorption. Now we'll talk, what's absorption? What's absorption?
It's gonna be.
I throw vacancy and absorption around. What are vacancy and what's vacancy and what's absorption? I might as well pull this out because I want to show you something. What is absorption?
How much square feet is getting leased?
How much
Net.
square feet is getting leased? Well, kind of, but it's a little bit more intricate than that.
Yeah, it's coming on
How
and
fast
coming
it's
off.
getting bought as it comes on the market.
Well, so we're leasing, so we're not buying.
Leasing,
Okay,
purchase.
so really, I mean, there is an answer to that, which is basically, initial supply, right, less what was leased, right, plus or minus product that's come on, less product that's come off, right, less ending inventory. So it basically talks to the increase in the square footage that's leased, taking into account product coming in and product coming out, okay? But we should understand, so I pulled, I think from IREE is where I pulled it. I pulled the, where is it? Where it is? Is it here? No, it's not here. Where did I put that thing? No, it's not here. Okay, forget that for a second. But if I can find, Where did I put this stuff? Hold on. Okay, I'll send you. I'm surprised I can't. Okay, well. Here we go. Yeah. Here they are. I think it's here. Hold on. Here we go. Okay, so when we talk about absorption, okay, measure total square feet leased over a period with no consideration given to space vacant and the same. So when you look at the formula, and I've got an example here for you, okay, make this a little bit smaller. Okay, so you take a look at positive absorption and negative absorption. So units or square feet vacant at the beginning, what's come on, what's come off, what's vacant at the end, it's what's absorbed. So beginning of the year we had 100,000 square feet vacant. Okay, so what's there, less what's occupied, what's vacant, how much has come on, 50,000 were removed, there's 100,000 vacant at the end, there's 200,000 vacant at the end. Positive absorption of 50, negative absorption of 50. Okay, that's from IREM, that's their, now vacancy, there's another, and again, like if you go to NAOP, there's a NAOP guide. NAOP's got interesting. NAOP's got you guys know what NAOP is?
National Association
Of Industrial and Office Properties. So, like they've got this whole, you know, because we use all these like buzzwords all the time and stuff, right? So they've got this whole stuff. What does proposed mean? You know, what's under construction mean? Year built, under construction, delivered. I mean, so there's all these buzzwords that we use in the industry that mean things, okay? And so they've got, you know, what's rentable building area, what's usable, so they've got kind of a curious, you know, checklist. And then vacancy is, so this is from NAOPS. So direct vacancy. A measurement expresses a percentage of the total amount of physically vacant space divided by the total existing inventory. Okay? So, and then you can get into whether sublease space is included or not. Okay, now we'll close that for a second. Let me just finish something else. I won't show you the quiz from next week. Maybe we won't do a quiz next week. I don't know. Maybe we won't. Maybe we will. So New Jersey, negative 2.3 million square feet. The rents are only 28%. Rent has only grown 2%. And you've got 400,000 square feet coming online. That's a concern. I think that's a concern. Okay, so we start taking a look at this. We're talking about metrics that are important here. What's the size of the market? What's the vacancy? What are the rents? What's the absorption? How much product is coming online? Right? And they'll start giving you a sense of the market that you're in. The way that I used to take a look at this, and I mentioned this report, I brought one, I mentioned this a few weeks ago, and one of the things that we used to do, this was the last one of the market reports that we used to put together. Now, this was for internal consumption, okay? And what we did, what we took a look at was every one of the markets that we were active in, okay? So this is, you know, we had office and industrial here, office and industrial here, office and industrial here, okay? Everywhere where we were active, we had a, and ultimately what we tried to do was make this as dummy-proof as possible, okay? So, I mentioned this the other day. Trends tell stories. Numbers tell stories, right? So, 3-year period, right? Absorption. You're definitely seeing some slowing down, right? Vacancy, right? Starting to go back up, right? Rental rates are going up. What do you think is going to happen to rental rates at some point down the line here? They're going to come down. Because these trends here are going to ultimately drive that. And there is a lag. There is a lag. So we would get the stuff from CoStar, by the way. We would call around to the extent we needed to the extent we got some information. But what we also would try to do is take a look at individual submarkets, because we were not necessarily active in all of the markets. Okay, we'd have them broken out, and we'd take a look at trends in rents and in vacancies, and we try to take a look at the major markets. We try to follow or track what were significant transactions in the marketplace, okay, and what was coming online, okay. So that was important for us. Big transactions, what's been delivered, what's proposed, and what's coming online, what's under construction. Because this talks to the supply. Okay, and as I've said, it's a supply and demand business. All right? You see absorption going up, you're typically going to see rents going up, you're going to see vacancy typically coming down. But at some point when they start intersecting, let me see if I can find, I didn't even look to see if I can find a market where you'd already, I'm going to go to Jacksonville because that's always bad. Well, here. Well, industrial. You're already starting to see here, right? You're already starting to see here an intersection, right? As absorption goes down, you're already starting to see an intersection there where rents are starting to come down again, right? Let me go. I think Broward was pretty bad too. Yeah, Broward. You're starting to see the same thing, right? Let me go to Jacksonville the last one. Yeah, so here, Lakeland, here's another one. So, part of the problem in Lakeland is yeah, there was absorption, right? But you had such low vacancy at a certain point, there was so much land there, people are starting to build, okay? And rents never really took off there. Rents were always like $5 a square foot there, And it's like Atlanta, it's like Dallas. There's so much land, you can always build. You can never drive price because of supply constriction. Because you can always just keep throwing supply out there, okay? So we'll leave it at that. We will reconvene for our last class next Saturday. I hope you have a great afternoon. Thank you for coming.